Hello everyone, hope all of you are doing well. A hearty welcome all of you to this session. So in this session we will discuss about a deadly fungal disease mucormycosis, which is most commonly known as black fungus among the people. But remember, this is a very important point. The first thing what we need to know is, sir, in medicine or in microbiology, there is no relation between the mucormycosis and black fungus. It is because, sir, mucormycosis is a fungal disease which is caused by the fungi belongs to the group Mucormycetes. Mucormycosis is not caused by black fungus. The black fungi, which are also known as pheoid fungi, are dematiaceous fungi. That means darkly pigmented fungi. They cause chromoblastomycosis and pheohypomycosis. Sir, chromoblastomycosis and pheohypomycosis, these are the fungal diseases caused by the fungi, black fungi, which are also known as pheoid fungi or dematiaceous fungi, whereas mucormycosis is caused by the fungi belongs to the group Mucormycetes. Then why people call mucormycosis as black fungus? We really don't know the answer. Personally, what I think, it is because of the characteristic clinical manifestation of the mucormycosis. So mucormycosis clinically manifests as the formation of black crust inside the nose, over the face, especially on the paranasal area, inside the oral cavity, over the palate, on the skin. So these are the various places where mucormycosis can form the black crust. Because of this, I think people call mucormycosis as black fungus. But remember, mucormycosis is not caused by black fungus. And also we need to know, sir, earlier it was known as pheohypomycosis. Then it was narrowed down to zygomycosis. But now it is known as only mucormycosis. First thing. The second thing, why we are calling it as a deadly fungal disease? It is because of its high mortality rate, which ranges from 40 to 80%. That means if 100 patients develop the disease, 40 to 80 patients may die. That is a very high death rate. So the average mortality rate is around 54% according to CDC. So why there is so much of mortality rate? It is because, remember this point, very important. So this disease mucormycosis is rapidly progressive. So it is rapidly progressive and highly destructive. Rapidly progressive because the disease will become fatal in just 7 to 10 days, and destructive because it produces the destructive enzymes which destroys the local tissue and even the surrounding bone. So that's why this is having high mortality, and we call this disease as a deadly fungal disease. So once we know about the disease, the next thing, so which are the fungi which causes this disease? The fungi which belongs to the group Mucormycetes. These are the fungi which causes this disease, mucormycosis. And this group of fungi, Mucormycetes, they belong to the order Mucorales, and which belong to the phylum Mucormycota. Okay, fine. Sir, what are these fungi which comes under this group Mucormycetes? So there are 9 important fungi which comes under this group Mucormycetes, which causes this disease, mucormycosis, and those 9 fungi are, sir, Rhizopus, Absidia, and Mucor. Rhizomucor, Saxinia, and Syncephalastrum. Then Apophysomyces, Coccieromyces, and Cunninghamella. So these are the 9 important fungi which comes under this group Mucormycetes causing this disease, mucormycosis. Among these 9, the first 3 are more common causing this disease. That is Rhizopus, Absidia, and Mucor. Among these first 3, the very most common is Rhizopus. Rhizopus is the most common of all these fungi causing the disease mucormycosis. Sir, what are these fungi? To which group they belong? Because we know that fungi are 4 types. So the fungi are either yeast or yeast-like, or molds or dimorphic. Right? So to which group these fungi belong? So these fungi, they belong to the group molds. And we know that, sir, molds are the group of fungi which contains the hyphal forms and the spore forms. And the hyphal forms are the filamentous forms, and the spore forms are the round spherical forms. The one thing what we need to know here, sir, the hyphal forms are very delicate. Remember this, very important. And the spore forms are very resistant. Delicate and resistant to what? So delicate and resistant to handling and also to the climate, the extreme climate, like extreme temperature, extreme hot and extreme cold. Right. So once we know about the disease and once we know about the fungi which causes this disease, the next thing, sir, where are these fungi present? So these fungi, they are present in the environment. In the environment where they are present, so they are present in the soil and the decaying vegetative matter. So they are present in the soil and decaying vegetative matter like the decaying fruits, the rotten vegetables and fruits, the drying leaves, right? The drying leaves from which we produce the compost, the manure, the fertilizers. So these are the places where these fungi are present. Okay, if these fungi, if they are present here, how they are entering into the humans causing the disease? So the fungi can enter into the humans by three modes. So the three modes of infection are inhalation of spores, ingestion of spores, and direct contact of injured skin with the spores. Sir, why only spores? Because I told you spores are the resistant forms. That means these fungi, they are present in the environment, especially in the spore form, not in the hyphal form, because hyphal forms are very delicate. Right. So these are the three modes of infection by which these fungi, they will enter, causing the disease in humans. So how they will enter? Via inhalation. How they will enter? Via inhalation. If you are handling the soil, or if any construction is going on near you, the soil dust is created. This soil dust carries these spores and you will inhale these spores. That's how you will get the infection, via inhalation. And by coming to the ingestion, if you are eating any fruits or vegetables or any type of food which is contaminated with these spores, then these spores enter via ingestion, that is through oral cavity. And if you're handling the soil or the manures or the compost, whatever, if you get injured, then these spores, they will enter via skin. So these are the modes by which they can enter inside us, causing the infection. Okay, fine. Sir, when they enter, how do they cause the disease? Very important, concentrate here. So when they enter, what happens in a normal, healthy, immunocompetent individual? Right, the individual in whom the immunity is good, the macrophages and the neutrophils, they will come, they will phagocytose these fungi and they will inhibit this fungi. So normal healthy individuals, though they will come across these spores, these fungi, oftenly they will not develop the disease because of their good immunity. Then who are the ones who develop this disease? So the individuals who are having the risk factors develop this disease, mycosis. Then what are those risk factors? So those risk factors are the uncontrolled diabetes, which leads to diabetic ketoacidosis. The patients who are suffering from iron overload on treatment with iron chelators like deferoxamine. Then the patients who are on corticosteroids, the patient who has undergone solid organ or bone marrow transplantation, the patients who are suffering from hematological malignancies, and the patients who are recovering from COVID-19, especially the diabetic patient and the patients who develop trauma and burns. So these are the risk factors. If they are present in the patients, favors the development of this disease, mucormycosis. Now the question is why? Why these risk factors favors the development of the disease? It is because you know that in the uncontrolled diabetes and diabetic ketoacidosis, so the macrophages are dysfunctional. Sir, why macrophages are dysfunctional here? Because of impaired glutathione mechanism, right? Because of impaired glutathione pathway, the macrophages are dysfunctional in uncontrolled diabetes and diabetic ketoacidosis. The second thing, sir, especially the rhizopus. The rhizopus is having ketone reductase system. By utilizing this system, this rhizopus overcome this ketoacidosis and survives, causing the disease. That's why rhizopus is more common among these fungi. So now coming to the iron chelators. First thing, what we know, iron is the growth factor for these fungi. When there is iron overload, right? When we treat these patients with iron chelators make the iron free. Now, how these fungi utilize this free iron? So they will utilize this deferoxamine drug as a siderophore. Very important. So these fungi, they will utilize this deferoxamine drug as a siderophore. And what is siderophore? We all know that siderophore is nothing but iron carrier. So which carries the iron, free iron in which carries the free iron and take the free iron inside the fungi. So that's how these fungi utilizes the free iron and they thrive. That's how they multiply and they cause the disease. So that's how they utilize the free iron. So that's why the patients who are on iron chelators, especially deferoxamine, they are the ones in whom this disease will manifest. Then the patients who are on corticosteroids, right? Because corticosteroid suppresses the immunity. The patients who have undergone solid organ or bone marrow transplantation, they are on immunosuppressive drugs. Again, this suppresses the immunity. Hematological malignancy patients, again, they are on immunosuppressive drugs. If you take all these three things, they suppresses the immunity. When immunity is suppressed, these fungi, they will multiply and they will cause the disease. And also these hematological malignancies patients, so they are on chemotherapy, and most common side effect of this chemotherapy is, we know that neutropenia, right? So neutrophils are also very important, which acts against these fungi. So when there is neutropenia, again it favors the disease. Now coming to the COVID-19 patients, especially the diabetic patients who had COVID-19 and were recovering. So the COVID-19, the disease itself decreases the immunity. We know that the disease itself decreases the immunity to some extent, and the mainstay of treatment for COVID-19 is steroids. So when we treat them with the steroid, especially the diabetic patients, what happen? The sugar level will increase. The diabetes will go uncontrolled. Right, sugar levels increases. So there are three important risk factors: decrease of immunity, then patient on steroids, then increased sugar levels. Because of so many risk factors in a patient who is recovering from COVID-19, especially diabetic patients, nowadays the mucormycosis is more common and the incidence is increasing more and more in the patients who are recovering from COVID-19, especially the diabetic patients. Now, the patients who are having any of these mentioned risk factors, and if they develop trauma and burns, they can easily develop the cutaneous mucormycosis. So therefore, these are the risk factors which are responsible for the development of this disease. Okay, fine. The individuals who are having this risk factor, the fungi they will enter, they will cause the disease. But how these fungi they cause the disease in these individuals? What is the mechanism? What is the pathogenesis by which this fungi causes the disease in those individuals who are having these risk factors? To understand the pathogenesis, first we need to understand what are the sites which are involved by these fungi. To understand what are the sites which are involved, first we need to understand what is the route of entry. So route of entry we have already discussed. There are three modes of infection: inhalation, ingestion, and skin contact. Inhalation means it enter via nose. First, the nose is affected. From the nose, because it is a destructive fungi, it destroys the local bone and all, it destroys the cribriform plate and enters the brain, especially frontal lobe is involved. So nose is involved, brain is involved. Via nose, it involves the orbit, eye is involved. Via nose, it involves the paranasal sinus, paranasal sinus is involved. And via nose, they destroy the palate and palate is involved. And via nose, they enter the upper respiratory tract and they involves the lungs. So these are the six sites which are involved when the fungi enters via inhalation. What are the six sites? Nose, brain, orbit, paranasal sinus, palate, and lungs. When it enters via ingestion, we know that the fungi reaches the stomach. So stomach is most commonly involved, and obviously then it reaches the intestine. Intestine is rarely involved. So when the fungi enter via direct contact of injured skin, then what will happen? The skin is involved. So these are the sites which are involved when they enter. So once we know these are the sites which are involved, now coming back to the pathogenesis. So we know that the mode of infections are inhalation, ingestion, direct contact. Inhalation means the six areas which are involved: the nose, brain, PNS, orbit, palate, and lungs. Via ingestion, stomach and intestine is involved. Sorry, intestine involvement is very rare. Via direct contact, the skin is involved, right? So these are the sites which are involved. When the fungi enter and reaches these sites, what will happen? So in a normal healthy individual, phagocytosis by macrophages and neutrophils, oxidative burst mechanism. Now what will happen? They will inhibit these fungi. So normal healthy individuals, they will not develop the disease. But what happens in those individuals who are having the risk factors? So those individuals who are having the risk factors, right? The macrophages and neutrophils, they're dysfunctional. They're not able to inhibit these fungi, and the spores which are entering from the environment, so these spores, they will germinate into hyphal form. Once the hyphal forms are formed, so these hyphal forms causes the inflammation, which leads to various clinical manifestations. One important thing, so all these fungi are angio-invasive. That means they can invade the blood vessels. They can cause angio invasion. What if there is angio invasion? If there is angio invasion, so there is thrombosis. If there is thrombosis, there is ischemia. If there is ischemia, sir, there is necrosis. We know that necrosis is nothing but the death of the tissue. The tissue dies. This dead tissue forms the black crust. That's why the black crust is the characteristic clinical manifestation of this fungi mucormycosis, right? Because these fungi are angio-invasive. So therefore, in short, so this is about the entire pathogenesis by which these fungi causes the disease. When we know the pathogenesis, when we know how these fungi causes the disease in us, what are the clinical manifestations, how this disease clinically manifests. To understand the clinical manifestations, first we need to know what are the different types of mucormycosis. So based on the site involved, there are many types of mucormycosis. So what are those types? So rhinocerebral mucormycosis. Rhino means nose, cerebral means brain, involving the nose and the brain. Then rhino orbitocerebral, involving the nose, orbit, and brain. Then pulmonary, involving the lungs. So what about PNS and palate? So paranasal sinuses and palate, they're usually involved in most of the cases where nose is involved. Along with the nose, the PNS and palate are involved in most of the cases. Then gastrointestinal, involving the stomach and intestine. Then cutaneous, involving the skin. Then whatever may be the type of mucormycosis, if the fungi enters blood, right? If the fungi enters blood, via blood, it disseminates into various organs, causing disseminated mucormycosis. And disseminated mucormycosis is the last stage of the disease, this mucormycosis. And if patient develops disseminated mucormycosis, the mortality is very high, more than 90%. Usually the patient dies. It is having very poor prognosis. Now, rhinocerebral, rhino-orbitocerebral, and pulmonary, we know that these three types of mucormycosis, the patient can develop when the mode of infection is inhalation. And gastrointestinal, the patient will develop when the mode of entry is ingestion, and when the mode of entry is direct contact of injured skin, then the patient will develop cutaneous. Whatever may be the mode of infection, if the fungi enters blood, the patient develop disseminated mucormycosis. So these are the various types of mucormycosis. Once you have understood this, next, sir, what are the clinical manifestations? What are the signs and symptoms? How this disease clinically presents? So if the nose is involved, right? If the nose is involved, you can see the nasal congestion, the nasal blockade, and the black crust in the nose. Very important. Nasal congestion, nasal blockade, and black crust in the nose. And paranasal pain, swelling, and paresthesia. Then black crust in the palate. These are the more common and very important signs whenever the nose is involved, because I have told you when nose is involved, even the paranasal sinuses and palate is also palate are also involved, right? So these are the most common presenting symptoms, because rhinocerebral is the most common type of mucormycosis which occurs in the individual. Now, when the brain is involved, you will see the headache, vomiting, and seizures. So, when the orbit is involved, so diplopia and ptosis, then periorbital cellulitis and abrupt vision loss. Very important. There is a permanent, abrupt, and sudden vision loss may occur. And if you see the clinical manifestations, sir, cranial nerves are also involved here. So if you see paranasal pain, swelling, and paresthesia, so fifth cranial nerve, trigeminal nerve is involved here. So diplopia and ptosis, third cranial nerve, oculomotor nerve is involved here. And also in some cases, the seventh cranial nerve, facial nerve will also involve. So cranial nerves like 3, 5, and 7, these are the cranial nerves which are most commonly involved. So when lungs are involved, then the patient will manifest with chest pain, hemoptysis, and breathing difficulty, that is dyspnea. And when stomach and intestine are involved, the patients may develop the ulcer and the gastrointestinal hemorrhage. And when skin is involved, sir, papules and pustules. So this pus on the skin shows the growth of fungi, and this fungi looks like hair. That's why it is known as hairy pus. That's why it is known as hairy pus. And also, you can see the black crust on the skin. So these are the various clinical manifestations of this disease, mucormycosis. Right. So this is the image showing various pictures of mucormycosis. The image A, the first image involving the showing the cutaneous mucormycosis involving the leg, and all other pictures in this image they are showing either rhinocerebral or rhino-orbitocerebral mucormycosis. So involving the eye, the black crest in the palate, and the black crest over the nose and inside the nose, and involving the paranasal areas. So this is how this disease mucormycosis clinically manifests. So once we have understood this, the next important thing is diagnosis. Early diagnosis and early treatment leads to good prognosis, and delay in diagnosis delays the treatment, which leads to very bad or poor prognosis, because we have already discussed this is a very rapidly and destructive progress, very rapidly progressive and destructive disease. The disease may become fatal in 7 to 10 days. That's why early diagnosis is very important to start the treatment early. So coming to the diagnosis, so when we come to the diagnosis, the first thing what is important is the sample collection. What is the sample we can collect? So the tissue biopsy. The tissue biopsy is the best sample to be collected. Other samples like deep nasal swab or nasal secretions can also be collected, but tissue biopsy is the best sample. Remember this. And second important point, when we collect the tissue biopsy, we should not homogenize or grind the sample. If we do that, the hyphae which are present in the sample, they are very delicate, they will get damaged. Hyphae will get damaged. And remember this point, the spores are very resistant, they are present in the environment. When the spore enters into our body, the spores will germinate into hyphal forms. So hyphal forms are the ones which are present in our body. So hyphal forms are the ones which are present in the tissue, and they are very delicate. If you grind the tissue, they will get damaged. If they get damaged, what will happen, sir? They will not grow on the culture. That's why we should not grind the tissue. And once we collect the sample, next important thing, so do the sample microscopy, right? So take the sample and look under the microscope. What do you see? Obviously, we see the hyphae. We see the hyphae. But what are the microscopic methods we can use? So we can use KOH mount or histopathological examination, that is histopathological stains or fluorescent stains can be used. If you're using KOH mount, we are just taking the sample and we are adding few drops of KOH, that is potassium hydroxide. Sir, why we are adding potassium hydroxide? It is because the tissue also contains proteinaceous material, and this proteinaceous materials, it also looks like the filaments, and will get confused between the proteinaceous materials and hyphae. Right? That's why we use KOH. KOH is a clearing agent which clears the proteinaceous material. Therefore, we will not get confused between the proteinaceous material and hyphae. That's it. That's why we use KOH mount. And next, if you come to histopathology, there are two histopathological stains which are known as fungal stains, because they stain the chitin, which is the component in all the component of the cell wall in component of fungal cell wall, which is present in the cell wall of all the fungi. So the two histopathological stains which are known as fungal stains, they are PAS and GMS. PAS means per iodic acid skiff. GMS means Brocaud's, Gomorrhe's, methanamine, silver. And there is one fluorescent stain which is known as fungal stain, because it stains the chitin in the cell wall. So that is CFW, chalcofluor white. Whatever may be the method we are using in the direct microscopy or sample microscopy, ultimately in the tissue, in the sample microscopy, what we see is broad aseptate obtuse angle branching hyphae. We see hyphae, but the characteristic of the hyphae of this fungi, they are very broad. Very broad means they are very broad. That means they are 8 to 16 micron in diameter. That's why they are very broad compared to the hyphae of other fungi. They are very narrow, they are somewhat around 3 to 5 micron. But hyphae of these fungi causing mucormycosis, they are very broad. That is one identification point. Second, the hyphae of the other fungi, they contain septae in between, but the hyphae of the fungi causing this disease are aseptate, they do not have septae. And next important identification point, sir, the hyphae of the other fungi, they are they are if they are branching, they are acute angle branch, they have acute angle branching or irregular branching. But the fungi which causes this disease, mucormycosis, they are having a right angle or obtuse angle branching. right angle, or obtuse. So these are the three identification points based on the hyphae. So these are the characteristics of the hyphae of those fungi which belongs to this group Mucormycetes, which causes mucormycosis. Very important. So now see the hyphae here. So this is the first KOH mount preparation where we have added the KOH. And what do we see is broad aseptate hyphae with obtuse angle branching. Same thing we see here. So this is the KOH mount, and this is the past periodic acid skiff, and this is the GMS stain Gomorrhe's methanamine silver, and this is CFW chalcofluorite where we see the blue color fluorescence. So all these images or all these methods, they are showing just broad aseptate, right, obtuse angle branching hyphae. And the appearance on this it is also known as ribbon like. So the hyphae looks like ribbon. So ribbon like appearance of the hyphae. Why ribbon like appearance? Because I told they are very delicate. While handling, they will get damaged, right? While handling the sample, they will get damaged, and they will looks like a ribbon on this microscopic method. So broad, that is 8 to 16 micron in diameter, aseptate, there is no septate, and branching is right angle or obtuse angle, not acute or irregular, which shows a ribbon like appearance on these microscopic findings. So this is how we can identify that these are the fungi which causes mucormycosis on sample microscopy. So once after this, we have to take the sample and we have to inoculate the sample on the culture media so that we can grow the fungi in the laboratory. So the most commonly used culture media for all the fungi is SDA, right, including these fungi. So what is SDA? Sebarodes dextrose agar. So when we grow these fungi on this Sebarodes dextrose agar, remember all the fungi, they grow on the surface. The growth on the surface of the Sebarodes dextrose agar, this growth is known as vegetative growth. Similar to other fungi, so these fungi, they also grow on the surface of the Sebarodes dextrose agar, that is, they show the vegetative growth. But how do they differ from other fungi in the growth? So these fungi, not only they show vegetative growth, not only they grow on the surface of Sebarodes dextrose agar, but they also grow above the surface. They keep on growing above the surface of the Sebarodes dextrose agar. So the growth above the surface of the agar is known as aerial growth. So that's how these fungi differs from other fungi in the growth on SDA. So they show both vegetative growth and aerial growth. The growth which is going above the surface of the Sebarodes dextrose agar is known as aerial growth, and this growth looks like cotton candy. The growth is like cotton, and it looks like cotton candy, right? Cotton candy. That's what is known as cotton candy like growth. As they are going above the surface, ultimately they will reach the top and they will lift the lid. That's why all these fungi, they are known as lid lifters. Very important. All the fungi which belongs to Mucormycetes causing mucormycosis, they are known as lid lifters. It is because of the aerial growth of these fungi. And what is the color? Sir, the color, initially all the fungi, they are white in color, but later they will become grayish. So these are the characteristic of growth of all these fungi. Except if you see Rhizopus. So Rhizopus is the only exception here in the color, because the Rhizopus initially, all the fungi we know that initially it shows white in color, but Rhizopus is also white in color, but it shows black color dots initially. So white growth with black colored dots, which looks like salt and pepper. So salt, this is what is known as salt and pepper appearance. And this salt and pepper appearance is the characteristic of Rhizopus. So that's how you can identify Rhizopus on the growth itself. But all other fungi, they show white cotton candy appearance. Only Rhizopus shows salt and pepper appearance. So if you see the images, you can see this. The first image, this is Rhizopus. So you can see this is the tube which containing the Sebarodes dextrose agar. Right? The Sebarodes dextrose agar here we have placed in a slant manner. So this is the tube which is a slant tube which is a SDA tube. This is the slant SDA tube, right? On which we have added the sample. The fungi, they started growing on the surface, and again they started growing above the surface, and you see they are reaching the top. They are reaching the top. That is aerial growth, right? So this is what is known as aerial growth. They are showing the aerial growth. As they grow, they reach the top and they lift the lid if the lid is present. That's why they are known as lid lifters. And you see all the fungi which causes mucormycetes, sir, initially they are white in color. Initially they are white in color. Later they will become grayish. So initially they are white in color, later they will become grayish. But so this is Rhizopus. So Rhizopus is the only fungi which shows white color growth with black color dots. So nothing but salt and pepper appearance. So these are the characteristic manifestations of these fungi on growth, these fungi on culture media, right? So this is about the culture. So once they grow here on this SDA, now we have to take this growth and identify what is this. Say Rhizopus, you can easily say, okay, this is Rhizopus. But still, what about other fungi? So we have to identify what is this growth which is growing on the SDA. By looking at this growth, we know that these are the fungi which belongs to mucormycetes because they are showing aerial growth. But we have already discussed in the beginning of this session, there are 9 fungi which belongs to this group mucormycetes. Among these 9 fungi, we know that the most common causing the mucormycosis is Rhizopus, Apsidia, and Mucor. How are you going to tell whether it is Rhizopus, Apsidia, and Mucor, or any other fungi which belongs to this mucormycetes? For that, we have to take this growth and again we have to look under the microscope. That is what is known as culture microscopy. Now we need to do culture microscopy. Take the growth and look under the microscope. And obviously we have to do staining. The stain what we do here after culture is LPCB stain. Very important. The stain what we do after culture is LPCB stain. The stain what we use directly on the sample, they are KOH or PAS or GMS or CFW. Right now when we add LPCB stain to this growth, and if you look under the microscope, obviously we see broad, aseptate, obtuse, angle, branching hyphae. There is no doubt in that hyphae are present. But on culture, the fungi they also produces spores. Very important. So on culture, the fungi also produces spores. Therefore, in culture microscopy, we are not just seeing the hyphae, but we also see the spores. In sample microscopy, we see only hyphae, because the tissue contains only hyphae. But when we add the sample on the culture media, the fungi grows, the hyphae grows, and these hyphae also produces the spores. When we talk about the spores, what type of the spores produced by fungi? The fungi produces 2 types of spores: asexual spores and sexual spores. And we know that only asexual spores are seen when we grow on SDA. When we grow on SDA, sexual spores are not seen when we grow on SDA. So sexual spores are produced by these fungi only when we grow on special culture media. So we have grown these on SDA. Therefore, what we see is asexual spores. So what are the asexual spores which are produced by these fungi? Very important, guys. Never forget, sir. Asexual spores produced by these fungi, they are sporangiospores, right? So asexual spores produced by this fungi, they are sporangiospores. So sporangiospores are produced by these fungi, and these are asexual spores which are formed on the SDA. So what about the sexual spores? If you talk about the sexual spores produced by these fungi, they are known as zygospores or oospores. They are known as zygospores or oospores. And as I said, so these are the spores which are formed only on special culture media when they get the special nutrients. They are not formed by these fungi on they are not formed by these fungi on SDA. On SDA, we see only the production of asexual spores, that is sporangiospores. And these sporangiospores, they are present within the sporangium. And this sporangium, it is present at the end of the sporangiophore. And this sporangiophore arises from the hyphae. So this is how they are present. This is how they are present. Sir, what about these rhizoids? So rhizoids are the root-like structures which are also seen on culture microscopy. So root-like structures which are also seen on the culture microscopy. So what and all do we see in culture microscopy in LPCB stain? We see broad, aseptate, obtuse, angle, branching hyphae. Along with that, we see asexual spores, the sporangiospores, which are within the sporangium, which is at the tip of the sporangiophore, which is arising from the hyphae. And we also going to see the rhizoids, which is root like structures. Now if you see the image, so this is the image which is describing each and everything. If you see what is this, so this is aseptate broad hyphae, aseptate broad obtuse angle branching hyphae. From the hyphae what arises is sporangiophore. Sporangiophore is the stalk like stem like structure, stalk like or stem-like structure, sporangiophore. This sporangiophore ends with sporangium. This sporangiophore ends with this is sporangium. And this sporangium contains sporangiospores. So these are the blue color dots inside what I'm showing. These are sporangiospores, which are the asexual spores produced by these fungi on SDA. So sporangiophores, they are present within the sporangium, which is at the end of the sporangiophore, which arises from the aseptate hyphae. So this is the appearance on culture microscopy, that is in LPCB, lactophenol cotton blue mount after culture, and the point where the sporangiophore arises on aseptate hyphae. This point is known as nodal point. This point, very important. So this point is known as nodal point. This point is known as nodal point. Sir, why is this important? Because the one more structure what we have not seen is rhizoids. I told rhizoids are the root-like structures which we are seeing here, right? Now we have to see whether the rhizoids are present or not. If the rhizoids are present, they have arisen from the nodal point or not. So if you see the first image, sir, we are seeing the rhizoids, and rhizoids are arising from the node. So we are seeing nodal rhizoids. But in the second image, if you see, so nodes are present here, but the rhizoids are not arising from the nodes. So the rhizoids are in between the nodes. So what we are seeing, sir, we are seeing internodal rhizoids. We are seeing internodal rhizoids. In this image, what we are seeing, sir, in this image, there are no rhizoids. There are no rhizoids. So all the fungi, they appear same except for rhizoids. Guys, if you see nodal rhizoids, then 100% you can say it is Rhizopus, because Rhizopus is the only fungi which show nodal rhizoids. If you see internodal rhizoids, then you can say it is Apsidia, because Apsidia is the fungi which shows internodal rhizoids. And if you do not see rhizoids, then you can say it is Mucor. So this is how we can identify whether it is Rhizopus, Apsidia, and Mucor based on culture microscopy, that is in the LPC. Otherwise, all these structures above the hyphae, they are same for all the fungi. Sporangiospores, sporangium, sporangiophore, aseptate hyphae, branching, everything is same. But based on the placement of the rhizoids, if the nodal rhizoids, it is Rhizopus, internodal rhizoids, it is Apsidia, no rhizoids, it is Mucor. This is how we identify these three fungi. So ultimately, we have identified. And next, we can identify by one more method. That is molecular method, nothing but the PCR. We can use the PCR and detect the specific gene, and you can identify this is the fungus. So based on PCR, if you identify the gene of Rhizopus, it is Rhizopus. The gene of Apsidia, it is Apsidia. The gene of Mucor, it is Mucor. So that's how we can identify by molecular methods. And the last thing, imaging is very, very important in the management of mucormycosis. So we have to do CT or MRI based on the site involved, and in the imaging what we are going to see is the extent of the spread of the disease. That is very, very important, very, very important. Why it is important, I will tell you later. But now, the one important thing what you can see, if the patient is suffering from pulmonary mucormycosis, if the patient is suffering from pulmonary mucormycosis, what this is the image of the CT image of the lung. So what we are seeing here is, so this is the sign what is known as reverse halo sign. So we see the reverse halo sign in pulmonary mucormycosis. So what do you mean by this reverse halo sign? To understand reverse halo sign, first we need to understand halo sign. So halo sign we see in pulmonary aspergillosis. In pulmonary aspergillosis, what we see is a pulmonary nodule. which is surrounded by a transparent opacity, which is known as ground glass opacity. So we see a pulmonary nodule, which is surrounded by this ground glass, the transparent ground glass opacity, that is GGO. So this is what is known as halo sign, which is seen in pulmonary aspergillosis. So the central opaque area, which is nodule, and the surrounding transparent area, which is ground glass opacity, exactly opposite what we see here in pulmonary mucormycosis. The central area is halo, right? The central area is halo and surrounded by the opaque area, right? Surrounded by the opaque area. Right. So the central halo area is nothing but the GGO, that is ground glass opacity, which is surrounded by the opaque area, which is the consolidation. Is the consolidation. So the central transparent area and the surrounded opaque area, GG1 surrounded by consolidation. So this is what is known as reverse halo sign. That is what we see here in this image. The central, the ground glass opacity, transparent, and the surrounding consolidation, reverse halo sign. This is the characteristic of pulmonary mucormycosis. So this is the diagnostic points which are important for the diagnosis of mucormycosis. Once we have understood how to diagnose, what are the methods to diagnose, now there is one guideline which is known as ECMM guidelines for the diagnosis of this disease, mucormycosis. So what do you mean by this ECMM guidelines? ECMM means European Confederation of Medical Microbiology. So ECMM say the first thing for in the diagnosis what we need to do is imaging. So imaging is the must and the first thing to do to know the extent of the disease. Once you do the imaging, then you collect the sample, and once you collect the sample, so you can perform three things for identification. Do the direct microscopy, that is sample microscopy, where you see the broad aseptic, where you see the hyphae with three identification features: broad, then aseptate, then right angular or obtuse angle branching. Then you can perform culture and identification by LPCB, where you see the hyphae and also the spores, that is asexual spores, that is sporangiospores, and also you see the rhizoids, based on which you can identify the uh, rhizoids, based on which you can identify the fungi. Otherwise, we can do molecular identification by using the PCR, by detecting the gene. So ECMM guidelines. So this is the ECMM guidelines, right? Which is first we have to do imaging to know the extent of the disease. Then sample is collected and we can perform sample microscopy, then culture and culture microscopy. Otherwise, you can do molecular identification by PCR. So once we have understood these guidelines, why it says imaging is very important, the first thing to perform. For that, we need to know the treatment. If we talk about treatment, so treatment is surgical plus medical. Concentrate here, very important, not just medical. It is surgical plus medical. So surgical debridement is very important and it plays a key role in the treatment of mucormycosis. That's why the guidelines say first we have to do imaging to know the extent of the disease, because we have to go for surgical debridement, which is the very important a core thing to do for that in the treatment of mucormycosis. So along with the surgical debridement, we have to start with the drugs, that is the medical treatment. Sir, we can use the polyenes like amphotericin B. So liposomal amphotericin B you can use, or we can use the azoles like ivasuconazole and posaconazole. I'm telling you once again, other azoles are not effective. We can use only either ivasuconazole or posaconazole. And if you see these three drugs, so liposomal amphotericin B is always better compared to ivasuconazole, which is always better compared to posaconazole. So most commonly used, the first line treatment is always we have to start with liposomal amphotericin B. So once we know these are the drugs used, sir, what is the route? What is the route of administration? So liposomal amphotericin B is available only by IV route, and whereas azoles like ivasuconazole and posaconazole can be given IV or oral. Once we know the route of administration, sir, what is the dose? Liposomal amphotericin B, 5 to 10 milligram per kg per day. Whereas ivasaconazole, initially we have to go give 200 milligram TID for 2 days, then 200 milligram for OD from third day onwards. Posaconazole initially 300 milligram BD for 1 day, and then 300 milligram OD from second day onwards. So once we know the once we know the dosage, and then what is the duration, how long we have to give. So here once again very important, there is no exact duration of treatment for mucormycosis. Approximately, if you are using liposomal amphotericin B, at least you have to use for 4 to 6 weeks. And if you're using azoles like ivasaconazole, posaconazole, the treatment goes in months, approximately 4 to 6 months, though there is no exact duration of treatment given anywhere. Now, if you start with liposomal amphotericin B, we know that liposomal amphotericin B, the amphotericin B is highly nephrotoxic. So we have to keep on watch whether it is causing nephrotoxicity or not. So this is about the treatment of mucormycosis. It is always surgical plus medical. Remember, surgical debridement is very, very important. But there is ECMM guidelines which is given for the treatments. So what does this guideline says? So this guideline says, first, before starting, obviously we have to do surgical debridement. Obviously, the first thing what we have to do is we have to do surgical debridement. After doing surgical debridement, before starting with the drugs, we need to look whether the patient is having the pre-existing medical renal compromise or not. Patient is having pre-existing renal compromise or not. If patient is having pre-existing renal compromise, if it is present, do not start with amphotericin B. Start with either ivasaconazole or posaconazole IV. If the patient is not having pre-existing renal compromise, then you can start amphotericin B, because we have discussed amphotericin B is having renal toxicity, right? It is nephrotoxic. So now if you come to amphotericin B, there are many formulations of amphotericin B, like liposomal amphotericin B lipid complex, and amphotericin B deoxycholate. Always remember, liposomal amphotericin B is the better formulation of amphotericin B. We have to always use liposomal amphotericin B. So it can be used to treat any type of mucormycosis. But if it is not available, what to do? If it is not available, then you can go for amphotericin B lipid complex. That is better. So amphotericin B lipid complex you can use for any type of mucormycosis without CNS involvement. If there is CNS involvement, you have to use liposomal amphotericin B only, because liposomal amphotericin B is the only formulation we can reach the brain and attains higher concentration in the brain. So that's why if there is CNS involvement, you have to use liposomal amphotericin B. Otherwise, if amphotericin B is not available and only lipid complex of amphotericin B is available and CNS is not involved, then you can go for lipid complex amphotericin B. But if that is also not available, the guideline says better to avoid amphotericin B deoxycholate, not to use amphotericin B deoxycholate, because it is having very high toxicity. Liposomal amphotericin B is better than amphotericin B lipid complex, and guidelines says avoid amphotericin B deoxycholate. So once we start the treatment based on whether the renal compromise is present or not, how long to give, the exact duration is not given by the guidelines. As I said, there is no exact duration how long to give the treatment. So the guideline says monitor monitor the treatment response. The guideline says monitor the treatment response weekly by imaging, by doing the imaging, that is CT or MRI. We have to monitor the treatment response. So based on that, we can get, there are four possibilities. So based on this treatment, we are getting good response. Otherwise, there is no response. We are not having good response or bad response. The disease is stable. It is not worsening or it is not improving. Or we can guess a progressive disease, the worsening disease. Otherwise, the patient may develop nephrotoxicity if you have started with liposomal amphotericin B. Right. So now when you get these four possibilities, what to do? If you're getting a good response on treatment, then you can shift to oral drugs. From IV, you can shift to oral. Start with either ivasaconazole or posaconazole, right? And if the disease is stable, sir, it is not improving, but it is not worsening also. So continue the amphotericin B what you have started. Otherwise, you can also try and shift to ivasaconazole or posaconazole. If the disease is progressing, you have started amphotericin B, still the disease is not responding to amphotericin B, then amphotericin B is not working. Better to shift to again ivasaconazole or posaconazole IV. And patient is on amphotericin B, developed renal toxicity. So right, the creatinine, the blood, urea, nitrogen, everything is the blood urea and all, everything is increasing. Then we have to shift to ivasaconazole or posaconazole. This is what the guideline says. Very simple. Start with amphotericin B if there is no renal compromise, and if the disease is getting better, then you shift to oral drugs. You shift to oral drugs. If the disease is not getting better, whether it is stable or worsening or toxicity, better shift to ivasaconazole or posaconazole. What are the other modalities? So there are few other modalities, but the usefulness of these modalities are unclear. Unclear. For example, we can use hyperbaric oxygen and CSF, that is colony stimulating factors. So hyperbaric oxygen, increase oxygen, improves the neutrophil function, it inhibits the mucormycetes, and also it improves wound healing. Right? Colony stimulating factors, they enhance the immune responses. So these are the other modalities, but their usefulness are unclear. So now, like I said, prevention is always better than cure. If you talk about prophylaxis, sir, immunoprophylaxis, there is no vaccine. There is no vaccine. If you talk about chemoprophylaxis, sir, posaconazole can be used, but the posaconazole is recommended only as a primary prophylaxis only in hematological malignancy. The patients who are suffering from hematological malignancies with neutropenia, only in these patients, posaconazole chemoprophylaxis is recommended as a primary chemoprophylaxis, not in any other patients. Now, if you talk about secondary prophylaxis, so secondary prophylaxis means the patients who have already suffered from the mucormycosis and they got treated. If the patient is immunocompromised and developed mucormycosis, and he got treated, but after the treatment we have to continue posaconazole as a secondary chemoprophylaxis. If the patient is immunocompromised, it is not recommended in any other patient. So posaconazole as a chemoprophylactic agent recommended only in these situations. It is not recommended in any other conditions. So what if we start posaconazole as a prophylaxis in especially the COVID patients who are diabetic, who are having the risk factors? The studies, we need the studies to recommend the posaconazole. We need studies. We have to do studies as a posaconazole as a chemoprophylactic agent. At present, it is not recommended. There is no vaccine and there is no chemoprophylaxis. Then what to do? The best thing what we can do is to the strict control of diabetes. Remember this, guys, very, very, very important. The strict control of diabetes is very important and the core part in the prevention of the development of this disease. We have to avoid coming in contact with soil and decaying matter. If you are using the corticosteroids or immunosuppressive drugs, decrease the dose or slowly stop these drugs. And if the patient is suffering from neutropenia, treat the neutropenia. So these are the best thing what we can do to prevent the development of this disease. So this is about the entire mucormycosis, which is known as black fungus. Hope you have enjoyed this session, guys, and you have understood each and everything